Since 2015, Jared Stillman has rocked Nashville sports.
That team freaking stinks.
And now he's back. The takes are hotter than ever.
I mean, let's be honest, he just can't coach.
Welcome to Stillman and Company.
Stillman and Company on the 440 Sports Network on YouTube at Stillman and Co. Like and subscribe, and our subscriber count keeps on climbing, which we're very, very excited about. Loaded show today on the program. We got a lot of different stuff to get into. We got to get into this gambling ring that apparently the FBI has arrested people today. We'll get into that. We got a great Thursday night sermon, and we do have in about 10 minutes or so the return of the Las Jared Casino and Sportsbook head coaching odds for the Tennessee Titans. So I want to start on this. And I was a little surprised when I saw Mike Organ tweet out that he caught up with Eddie George, the Bowling Green State head coach, and asked questions about the state of the Titans, and asked questions about Bowling Green State, and asked questions about, I guess, the mascot of Bowling Green State, which I don't really know anything about. But I've always said this when it comes to franchise icons. When a team decides that you are a franchise icon, that you are worthy of representing that organization in perpetuity, that is incredibly special. But it also carries a lot of weight. You know, when Floyd got inducted into the Titans Ring of Honor, or they told him that he was going to be put in the Ring of Honor, he said, you know, this is the single highest honor you can get, short of being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so when teams are judicious with whom they put into their Hall of Fames and their Ring of Honors, there is kind of a two-way street that comes with being a franchise icon and being respected enough by the organization to be honored forever. And there's no doubt when it comes to the Titans that Eddie George is a franchise icon. There are a lot of really good players who played for the Titans over the years that were great Titans, like Jarrell Casey and Delaney Walker and Blaine Bishop and Frank Wycheck and Javon Curse and Derek Mason and Samari Roll and Chris Johnson, but there really aren't that many franchise icons. There are three when it comes to the Tennessee Titans. There's Steve McNair, Eddie George, and Derrick Henry. Everybody else, in my opinion, was a good Titan, but not a franchise icon. A.J. Brown was a good Titan, not a franchise icon. Ryan Tannehill, Kevin Byard, good Titans, not franchise icons. And so when you are a franchise icon, your words matter. They carry weight. They carry serious weight. So when I saw Eddie George tell Mike Organ that Amy Adams Strunk has set the franchise back, quote, at least a decade and maybe more, I said, wow. And I had to wonder, man, did Eddie George say that because Eddie felt like Amy needed to hear that? When you're a Hall of Famer for your team, your words matter more. When your number's retired, your words matter more. And the Titans are in this unique situation where its fan base, most of the best players in the history of the franchise, are not revered by this fan base because we didn't grow up cheering for Warren Moon or Earl Campbell. So Eddie George is somewhat of a unicorn because Derrick Henry is currently playing for another team, not exactly his place, and Steve McNair, God rest his soul, is no longer with us. So Eddie George comes out and criticizes the owner. And I know Eddie knows Amy and they have a relationship and Eddie likes Amy and Eddie has said a lot of good things about Amy over the years. So when Eddie comes out and criticizes the owner and says she set the organization back at least a decade, maybe more, I wonder if Eddie George is saying this because he knows she needs to hear it. I can say whatever I want to say. I have no idea if Amy Adams Strunk is listening. Though I have heard in the past, there have been times I've said things she didn't necessarily like. But I can guarantee you, when Eddie George says Amy Adams Strunk has set the franchise back at least a decade, that's getting to Amy Adams Strunk. Eddie George is such a Titans legend that if he were to come out and endorse a head coaching candidate, if he were to say, I think Matt Nagy should be the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans, well, that means something because he's Eddie freaking George. So I was just shocked because Eddie George is not new to this. Eddie's been a college football coach for the last handful of years. Eddie George has been a Titans icon and essentially out of the game for about the last, 20 years, whatever it's been. Eddie George has represented the franchise in a lot of different capacities for a long time. And while, again, his focus is probably on coaching Bowling Green, he knew when he was asked about the Titans, and he had to answer, a generic, hey, the locker room was so important. When I was there, we built a culture, blah, blah, blah. And then he had one which was something along the lines of, hey, Callahan didn't have a lot of time to get his shit in order. That's whatever. But when he criticizes the owner and says she set it back at least a decade, he knows what he's doing. He knows he's calling out the owner. He knows she's going to hear it. He knows she's going to be upset about it. And in the case of Eddie George, who is not a hothead, who never, ever wants to cross lines, this was not something that he just did off the cuff. So when I saw that in the Tennessean, I was a little wowed. And I have to wonder the why. Why did Eddie George feel the need to say that? Again, Mike Organ's been covering sports in Nashville, I want to say it's been like 40 years. And so you get a call and, hey, Mike Organ wants to talk to you from the Tennessean. Eddie George has probably known him for forever. Okay, let's talk. Hey, Eddie, what do you think of the state of the Titans? Yeah, it's tough, but we're going to get them. We're going to whatever. No. Eddie's like, yeah, the owner, she set us back a decade. I saw that and I thought, damn. So then I asked myself, has Amy Adams Strunk really set the Titans back by a decade? And I'm going to say, in all fairness, I think the answer is no. But I'm not certain. Now, I'm not optimistic that the Titans are going to be good anytime soon within the next decade or whatever it may be because of Amy's ownership and because of the choices she makes to run the ball club, like Rand Carthon. But in the NFL, are you ever really a decade away? The thing about the NFL is you can get good pretty quickly. Now, you can't get great quickly, but you can get good. If the season ended today, and for all intents and purposes, the season is already over, the Titans would go into next year needing a right guard because Kevin Zeitler's a free agent, a tight end because Chigakonkwo is also a free agent and he sucks, 2 wide receivers, 2 to 3 outside linebacker, pass rusher types, 1 inside linebacker, and 3 corners because Roger McCreary's a free agent, L'Jarius Sneed is always going to be hurt, and Jalen Armour-Davis stinks. But that's not an insurmountable list to fix for next season. Now, the most important thing is that they're going to have to get the head coaching hire right, which I am not sure they will do. I have very little faith that they will do that. Then they need to be aggressive financially in free agency to add 1 or 2 impact players. And I mean real impact players. And they've got to get aggressive about it. You got to be smart, but they've got to be aggressive about it. They've got to make a move the same way that the Titans added DeMarco Murray 10 years ago when they tried to turn things around. And then they need to draft well. And that's easier said than done. I get it. But in the NFL, you're never a decade away. And I would have a hard time believing that this were possible if I hadn't seen the Titans do it 10 years ago. I remember watching the Super Bowl For the 2015 season, it was the Denver Broncos and the Carolina Panthers, the one where Cam Newton didn't jump on the fumble and Peyton Manning rode off into the sunset. And I remember watching that Super Bowl and thinking to myself, my God, these two teams are real football teams, and the Titans are nothing like these two football teams. It's like the Titans weren't even playing the same sport that those football teams were playing. And then a year later, the Titans hosted the Denver Broncos at the end of the 2016 season and beat them. They went from listless with an interim coach in 2015 to competing for the playoffs at the end of 2016. So because I've already lived through that, and I've seen countless other examples, like Jacksonville a couple of years ago, Houston 2 years ago, I wouldn't believe it, but I do. Let's use those same Denver Broncos. They were a total joke in 2022 with Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson, and they were in the playoffs in 2024. Cincinnati was picking first in 2020, and they were in the Super Bowl in 2021. Now, if you're going to say, hey, the Titans, how long is it going to take them to be able to compete for the whole Megillah? Well, that's a different discussion. That's much tougher. You need to build a team around about 10 core pieces, and you need about 4 all-pros to be able to compete for the whole thing. Right now, the Titans have 1 core piece, and that's Jeffrey Simmons. And again, I don't want to be rude about this, but Simmons is in his prime, and by the time the younger guys get good, Simmons will be like Delaney Walker or Jarrell Casey, who was kind of on the way out when everybody else was on the way in. Now, they hope Cam Ward is a core piece, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee Cam Ward can hold on to the football. Peter Skoronski doesn't count as a core piece because he's a guard, and you don't build your team around guards. So the Titans need about 7 players and about 4 all-pros to develop into a Super Bowl caliber team. But they are absolutely not a decade away from either A, being able to do that, or B, being able to compete and make the playoffs. And I have to say, I was kind of shocked to see Eddie George say that, because Eddie George over the years has been very, very politically correct when talking about the Titans. Eddie George has been very politically correct when really talking about anything over the years. I mean, I've had Eddie George on the radio 5 or 6 times over the years where, hey, Eddie George is going to sit down with us and we're going to talk about, and a lot of the times it was with Floyd, but I've had Eddie on the show with, after Floyd had passed away and things like that. I wouldn't say I know Eddie very well, but I've had Eddie on the show and I've talked to Eddie a bunch of times, and Eddie is never, like, when it would be like, hey, we're going to have Eddie George on the show, the ability to say that you were having Eddie George on the show was better than anything Eddie George was going to say. Because Eddie George, when he would come on the pro, he wouldn't say anything. And that's fine. He understands, hey, I'm a franchise icon, and my role is to almost be ambassador for the football team. And here is the guy who, again, now he's a head coach at Bowling Green, but is an ambassador for Titan football, who is definitely criticizing the owner whom he shares a relationship with, the owner whom retired his jersey. So as a Titans fan who lives and dies with this team, I will say I appreciate Eddie George stepping up to the plate and telling the truth. Because if you're Amy Adams Strunk, you can shrug off whatever Jared Stillman says. You can shrug off whatever Buck Rising says. You can insulate yourself with all the people that tell you how great you are. And yeah, the ball just didn't bounce our way. And you did the right thing, Miss Amy, but you'll get them next time. But you can't shrug off what Eddie George said. So that's the first thing. And I want to tell you about Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical, and then we will get to the Las Jared Sportsbook and Casino odds for the next Titans coach. We're going to probably do that every week around here. Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. They are great. They've been taking care of my home, and they can do the exact same for you. Hiller's been in business since 1990. They are family-owned and operated with 100% satisfaction of happy you'll be, or the service is free. If a customer isn't pleased with the work performed, they will make it right. Learn more at happyhiller.com, where they've got professional, experienced, trustworthy technicians who come into your home and leave it clean and better than they found it. Care is their core value. They believe that when they care about others, everyone wins, and they will take care of the customer on every job, every time. That's Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical, proud supporters of the Nashville Predators, the Vanderbilt Commodores, and the Tennessee Volunteers. Hiller, call the Happy Face Truck today. All right. Last week, we introduced the original Jared Sportsbook and Casino coaching odds for the Tennessee Titans in 2026. Now, I probably need to point something out given the nature of the news today surrounding the gambling community. Maybe I should make sure everybody knows that the Jared Sportsbook and Casino is a joke, but whatever. This is a look at the Las Vegas big board, the Jared big board from a week ago, in which Matt Nagy was the odds-on favorite at plus 250, Arthur Smith plus 275, Mike McCarthy plus 350, Mike McCoy plus 450, and then other names, Kingsbury, Stefanski, McDaniel, Brady, Mentor, Saleh, Vance Joseph, and then plus 10,000, Brian Flores and John Gruden. The Titans aren't hiring them anyways. So, after a week, those odds have changed. And they've changed with a little movement at the top where Mike McCarthy goes from plus 350 to plus 300, and Mike McCoy goes from plus 450 to plus 650, meaning it is a lot less likely that Mike McCoy is going to be the head coach next season for the Titans this week than it was last week. I've also dropped Mike McDaniel, so he goes from plus 1,115 to plus 1,215. Jesse Mentor, he's dropped because Indianapolis went in there and just put a foot up the LA Chargers rear end. And then I've got Robert Saleh plus 1,000. So Saleh was plus 2,000 last week. And I'm going to say this week, Robert Saleh plus 1,000. So the two big changes on the Jared Sportsbook and Casino big board, the two big changes are Mike McCoy dropping somewhat significantly to plus 650 for losing to Mike Vrabel. Because if they had won the game against the Patriots, Mike McCoy could have had his bonding moment with Amy Adams Strunk, where in the locker room after the game, he could say, I'm so proud of you. This week, you guys dealt with all the noise and you handled it great. And we came out, and when we put the work in, we show what we're capable of. And this game ball right here is for Amy Adams Strunk, and giving her a game ball, and they could have hugged it out and everything else. And I think that would have shot him up the casino board had he beaten Mike Vrabel. By the way, I'll just say, if they had won last week, Mike McCoy would have been the odds-on favorite to be the coach next year at the Jared Casino. But he didn't beat Mike Vrabel. And then Robert Saleh gets the bump from plus 2,000 to plus 1,000 because a lot of people seem to really be hyping Robert Saleh up. And there's kind of this feeling that, hey, Robert Saleh wasn't a dope. The Jets were the problem. And considering what Todd Bowles has been able to do since he left the Jets, I wouldn't totally rule that out. So I don't think they'll hire Robert Saleh, but I do think the odds are probably a little bit better for Robert Saleh to be the next coach of the Titans. And the difference between me and everybody else is I don't really have an opinion when it comes to these guys and the big board and who would be a good coach and who wouldn't be a good coach. And so now, again, this is the order with which I have it updated as of October 23rd. Matt Nagy plus 250, Arthur Smith plus 275, Mike McCarthy plus 300, Cliff Kingsbury plus 500, Mike McCoy plus 650, Kevin Stefanski plus 1,000, Robert Saleh plus 1,000, so he's significantly moved up, Mike McDaniel plus 1,215, Joe Brady plus 1,250, Jesse Mentor plus 2,000, Vance Joseph plus 2,500, and then Brian Flores and John Gruden both plus 10,000. They're suing the NFL. I don't necessarily have an opinion as to who the coach should be because I don't really know these guys. And in order to be able to determine whether or not somebody's going to be a good coach, you actually have to know them. A lot of people will say, well, look at the Bills offense, Jared. We want to be like that. Go hire Joe Brady. And I used to be like that too. But that doesn't really mean that you know how Joe Brady's going to be able to lead a football team. That being said, personally, I think the next coach of the Titans is going to be Matt Nagy. And that's why in each of the last 2 weeks, as we've been tracking the Las Jared Casino odds, Matt Nagy has been the favorite. And here's why. I really believe Chad Brinker's goal in all of this. And Chad Brinker can say whatever the fuck he wants, but I don't think Chad Brinker, and this is just a read I've got, I don't think Chad Brinker is like Mike Vrabel or John Robinson, who wants the power because they think I know best. I think Chad Brinker wants the power because Chad Brinker wants to be in charge. He doesn't actually have a vision for the team. There isn't some sort of belief at his core that this is how I want to run a football team. This is how I want to build a football team. And I will build a Super Bowl champion. I don't think that's how he operates. Again, Mike Vrabel's not going to business school, is he? So I think Chad Brinker's goal, and I'm just telling it like it is to maintain his job and his status for as long as humanly possible without ever ending up in Amy's crosshairs. And how do you do that? Well, I think the easiest way to do that is to give decision-making to Mike Borgonzi. And if I'm Mike Borgonzi and I'm going to make this work, I need a coach that can do one of two things. One, coach Cam Ward, because if Cam Ward is a bust, if I'm Mike Borgonzi and Cam Ward's a bust, I'm going to be fired by the middle of next season. And two, when it comes to the next coach, I want a coach that I know what kind of players he wants me to draft and what kind of players he wants me to sign in order to build a team around those players. And again, that person that would, in theory, check those boxes is Matt Nagy. Again, if Brinker wants this to be his organization in terms of my coach, my GM, my quarterback, then it may be somebody else. But I don't think that's what Brinker's in this for. I think Brinker's in this so that when he's having martinis, he can say he runs the Tennessee Titans. That's what I think Brinker's in this for. I think Brinker's in this so that I don't know how often they get paid over there, but every 2 weeks that check clears and that check will clear for as long as humanly possible. That's what I think Chad Brinker really cares about. Mike Vrabel, and again, the money's a big part of this, but you can't tell me that Mike Vrabel only cared about the money when it comes to coaching. But they're different cats. So if you're Brinker, your two options are either in order to maintain power for as long as possible, in order to keep the checks coming for as long as possible. The key for that, if you're Brinker, is to give it to Borgonzi all the power and decision-making, and you're just kind of an administrative suit. And when things get fucked up, you say he's the one who fucked it up. Or you hit it out of the park and you draft well, sign well, and hire a good coach. So again, if I'm Mike Borgonzi, I want a coach who can coach Cam Ward, and I want a coach who I know what players he's looking for, what scheme fits he needs. That person is Matt Nagy. Now, I do wonder who Matt Nagy would bring in as the defensive coordinator. Would it be somebody who he's working with in Kansas City right now, like Matt House, who is the former defensive coordinator at LSU? By the way, Caroline says Matt House is an absolute idiot. So if that's what it ends up being, that I guess would not be very exciting. I doubt he would hire Sean Desai, who was his defensive coordinator at the end in Chicago and a couple of years ago bombed with the Eagles. But the thing about Matt Nagy in the DC, which I actually like, the thing about Matt Nagy in the DC in Chicago when he was the head coach was he just kind of farmed out the other side of the ball. Like 1 year it was Vic Fangio, then Fangio got the Broncos job, so then it was Chuck Pagano. And so, again, there's going to be a handful of defensive coordinators that are available that you can hire, and you can say, here you go, Bubba. Here's your side of the ball, and Matt Nagy's going to coach offense, which is what I prefer if you're going to go with the offensive coordinator, play calling coach. So I still think the favorite to be the next Titans head coach is Matt Nagy. And it still feels to me like the next Titans coach will be one of three people: Mike McCarthy, Matt Nagy, or Arthur Smith. And each guy brings something different to the table. Arthur Smith brings his familiarity with the organization, and the organization, and more importantly, ownership's familiarity with Arthur Smith. The Titans are a very unique situation as far as ownership and management are concerned. Arthur Smith knows that. He grew up in this organization. Mike McCarthy brings both a Super Bowl ring and big name credibility to the job. The Titans are a joke in the NFL. And Mike McCarthy maybe has done some funny and bozo-like things over the years, but Mike McCarthy is not a joke of a coach. Mike McCarthy has been the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, won a Super Bowl, and the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So, again, not like you're hiring Landry, but he does have a name and he does have street credibility of Mike McCarthy's had success in the NFL. And Matt Nagy brings his relationship with Mike Borgonzi, his offense, which is what they're using in Kansas City for Patrick Mahomes. And the one thing that I feel like people aren't giving him enough credit for, that if they end up deciding to hire Matt Nagy, is going to be the narrative, and I already know it. He wasn't really that bad in Chicago. 4 seasons, made the playoffs twice, 34-31, coach of the year in 2018. He wasn't that bad. And Robert Saleh starting to climb. Mike McCoy goes down because he didn't beat Mike Vrabel. He didn't have his moment with Amy. Matt Nagy's the favorite. But I still think it's really going to be one of those three guys. It's going to be McCarthy, it's going to be Arthur, or it's going to be Matt Nagy. And then I'll throw Robert Saleh in there as kind of a, I could see them talking themselves in to Robert Saleh. And I guess we'll keep up with that throughout the course of the year because, again, this season is pretty much over, and I don't know if you can get all excited about the Mike McCoy thing, and that's just me. Speaking of Mike McCoy yesterday met with the media, and he was asked about Cam Ward and everything else. And Mike McCoy said something yesterday that apparently the people that are around Cam Ward never stop saying, but for some reason, it never really dialed with me to begin with, and it certainly doesn't make much of a difference now. But here is what Mike McCoy said yesterday about Cam Ward. Take a look.
The great thing about him is he wants to be great. We back in the offseason program, you guys heard about him being here early in the morning, leaving late. He busts his tail. He's a young player. And like all young players, there's the ups and downs. And, a great example is Peyton Manning. He had the ups and downs a rookie year. Other players, my first year with Trevor in Jacksonville in a new system, is his second year. There's ups and downs. I've had a number of other quarterbacks I've coached too. The first year in the system, there's the good and the bad. But as a rookie in the NFL, there's so much to learn. There is so much to learn. And I think, that's the great thing about him. He stays so even keeled during the games, and it just, you talk to him on the sideline, you coach him through things, you just help him get better every single day. And that's what that's why I told him, since the first day he was in here. When I first talked to him, because he asked me some questions about some things, I said, hey, try to get better every single day. And that's every young player. You're trying to get better. There's a lot to learn at this level, and he'll just continue to get better every week.
Okay, so if I were the same guy I was in the 8th grade when I was 14 years old, and I would watch Monday Night Live with Jeff Fisher, which would go down at the Opry Mills Mall every week on Channel 2, I might hear that and think, man, Cam Ward has the commitment to be great. I am so happy that this organization has Cam Ward, and Cam Ward is the man, and Cam Ward's a dog, and Cam Ward's gonna be. Can I tell you something that bothers me about this Cam Ward thing? All we ever hear about are the things that we don't see with Cam Ward. All we ever hear about to be excited about the potential that Cam Ward has as a player is the intangibles. The fact that he was a 0-star recruit. The fact that his teammates really are led by him. The fact that he shows up in the morning. The fact that all of that's great, but if you can't play, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of guys in the NFL. I saw Cam Newton on his show talked about Derek Anderson and how Derek Anderson taught him how to be a quarterback when he entered the NFL. About how Derek Anderson would go about showing up early and how he would go about getting his work done and how he would go about the meetings and all that kind of stuff. That's great. I'm sure Derek Anderson was a great leader. The problem was, outside of 1 year where Derek Anderson went ham, Derek Anderson wasn't very good. So when I keep hearing about, hey, Cam has the desire to be great. You know who else had the desire to be great? Will Levis had the desire to be great. Does that mean that Will Levis is great? Absolutely not. And I get that it's great that Cam is even keeled and the sunshine about the guy Cam is and the leader Cam is. They love to pump it. But a lot of people can want things in life. The question is, do you have the ability to achieve it? And then the other question is, do the Titans have the ability to put Cam Ward in position to be that good? And when I heard Mike McCoy mention Peyton Manning, my head dropped. And again, this might be part of the reason why Mike McCoy is falling on the big board. You've got to let the Peyton Manning thing go. Again, I call this exception bragging, where you take the exception to the rule, then try to use the exception to justify why your guy is going to work. People did the same thing with Levis last year about Peyton Manning had a tough rookie year. First of all, Peyton Manning led the NFL in interceptions as a rookie. Like, he set the rookie record for interceptions. He also threw for about 1 billion yards. He threw for more touchdowns than he did interceptions. And they were 12th in the NFL in total offense. The reason the Colts were 3-13 that year is because they were 29th in defense. Right now, the Titans are 32nd in the NFL in offense. Peyton Manning was never 32nd in the NFL in offense. And then Mike McCoy talked about, and hey, Trevor Lawrence, he got kicked in the teeth at the beginning of this too. I know. And Trevor Lawrence might be a bust too. And here's the thing about Trevor Lawrence when we talk about nature versus nurture at the quarterback position. Trevor Lawrence was a generational prospect. Trevor Lawrence was a guy who his freshman year, people said 3 years from now, that's the guy. And he went to Jacksonville, one of the dumbest organizations in the league, with Urban Meyer as the head coach. And a lot of people will say Trevor Lawrence has never recovered from that. So in order for Cam to be good, he's going to have to overcome a bad organization that, like Jacksonville's, already fired the head coach, and the first head coach has put the rookie quarterback behind, and Cam was never viewed like Trevor Lawrence as a prospect. So these stories people tell about why this is going to work with Cam, they sound good, but I have to keep asking, are we writing a movie here, or are we trying to figure out whether or not this guy can lead the franchise and play quarterback in the NFL? Because if we're making a Disney movie, then I will say, hey, 0-star recruit, stinks at the beginning in the NFL, and he overcomes it someday and leads his team to the Super Bowl. Sounds good. But can you really be this bad at the beginning and blossom into a franchise guy? Like, Deshaun Watson wasn't this bad at the beginning. But Jared, they have better players than Jackson Dart is head and shoulders better than Cam Ward right now. And Jackson Dart's on a lousy team with a coach on the hot seat with his number one receiver on IR. So we can talk about Cam's desire and Cam's attitude and, again, all these intangibles when it comes to Cam, which I think the Titans oversold themselves on when they decided to draft them. But we need to start seeing some progress with the tangibles when it comes to Cam. Speaking of Cam, there's one other little topic that's starting to bother me. So the Titans released Tyler Lockett, had 10 catches for 70 yards this year, whatever. And Titan fans on Twitter have decided that they're going to go all in at getting Xavier Restrepo an opportunity to play on game days on Sunday. And I think Chris Sanders owes me a nice little amount of money because I never once bought into the Xavier Restrepo bullshit. And I thought the whole thing was ridiculous from the very beginning. And yet Titans fans just love this story and love this guy. They just think that Xavier Restrepo was good in college for 1 year with Cam Ward. So let's put him out there and let's see if he can play in the NFL. This is a guy who was undrafted by all 32 teams. This is a guy who the Titans have shown no inkling towards playing in an NFL game. This is a guy who no team has wanted to sign off of your practice squad. This is a guy who doesn't belong in the NFL. And yesterday, Xavier Restrepo had a gaggle around his locker for him to do a press availability. I think it was TD and Paul, they posted videos, and there were the news people and cameras and microphones in there for Xavier Restrepo. And I said, Xavier Restrepo is the local version of Shedeur Sanders. This guy is so insignificant as far as the organization is concerned. He's like the 9th receiver on the team. And my guess is that if they had more receivers get hurt, so if Van Jefferson couldn't play and they had to go even further down the well, that they would just sign other guys to be on the practice squad before they would actually put Restrepo in a game. And yet Titans Twitter's like, we have to see if the chemistry between Cam and Restrepo is going to work. I'll just tell it to you like this. A short guy who runs a 4.8 40 does not work in the NFL. But Jared Julian Edelman ran a 4.5. Yes, and a 4.5 and a 4.8 are night and day difference. Xavier Restrepo can't get on the field because the role that he would have to play would involve him being a slot receiver. That's Chim DK. And guess what Chim DK can do? Run. I said this during the offseason, and I got a lot of flack for it. But I said, you guys need to be cheering for the receivers that actually are going to play. And Cam Ward needs to be becoming good friends with those receivers. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Like, you need Io Manor and DK to be good players. Gives a rat's ass if Xavier Restrepo ends up being a good player or not. Because he's not an NFL player. I know it's a good story. I know it's like a Disney movie. I know that's what you guys want. But he's not an NFL player. He doesn't belong in the field. And the Titans don't need to see what he has. They need to get reps for the guys that actually have the potential to matter in the long run on their team. Okay, before we get to the Thursday night sermon, I have got to get to this NBA story. I mean, I guess it's an NBA story I woke up to this morning, the gambling story. Who else woke up to this? Holy shit. So Chauncey Billups, the coach of the Trailblazers, and Terry Rozier on the Heat, and apparently 30 others have been arrested by the FBI for some sort of gambling inquiry, whatever you want to call it. First of all, I think I may be Eskimo Brothers with one of the guys who got arrested. But more importantly, I actually think stories like this, while they're not good stories, I actually think this does show the benefit of legalized sports gambling. And you're going to say, what do you mean by that? And what I'm going to say is, when it comes to legalized sports betting, the DraftKings, the FanDuels, they work with the league so that when somebody tries to place a wager, like the Terry Rozier unders, allegedly, they then can alert the leagues and say, hey, something fishy is going on over here. They can alert the FBI and say, hey, something fishy is going on over here. Tony Soprano is not alerting the FBI to anything, but DraftKings and FanDuel will. And I understand the irony of the leagues and the networks that take money from the gambling companies and they tell you about the bets and they say, hey, don't cheat though. But the only way to have faith in a system is to know that if somebody were to cheat the system, that they would be held accountable for cheating the system. And allegedly, in the case of Terry Rozier, he's being held accountable for what seems like a pretty obvious case of stat shaving, point shaving, whatever you want to call it. And that gives me faith in the system. That again, this was, I want to say like $19,000 in bets in which they were able to track this. A couple of years ago, there was a story about the Alabama baseball coach and some wagers that were placed at a sports book at the Cincinnati Red Stadium, and they caught it just like that. You know, I've always wondered when it comes to the Grammys, the Oscars, with the betting markets on awards. Well, you know who wins, not you and I, but they know who wins those awards before the award show. So wouldn't it be easy to be the director of the Oscars and to tell somebody, hey, go put $100,000 on Stillmatic to win the Best Motion Picture Award? And I've always wondered why things like that didn't happen more often. And the answer is they track it. So I actually have more faith in the gambling now that it is legalized. I have more faith in the accountability for those who try to cheat the system than I would have beforehand when, again, it was the bookies and it was shady and it was because point shaving isn't new. It's not like when gambling was illegal that they didn't do it. It's just now we see somebody try to get away with it, a rather obscure NBA player. And again, $19,000 on Terry Rozier over-unders is pretty telling. You know, that's not something that I think a lot of people would spend a bunch of money on, but I give him credit because $19,000 is not a lot in the DraftKings budgets. Now, the Chauncey Billups story, and I think these need to be separated because these are two totally different things. With mafia connections and poker games with x-ray machines allegedly in the tables and hidden cameras to see the cards, that is a whole nother thing. That is wild. According to ESPN, Billups, who was arrested in Oregon, is charged in a separate indictment alleging a wide-ranging scheme to rig underground poker games that were backed by mafia families, authorities said. The defendants are accused of using technology to steal more than $7 million from victims in the New York area. And I saw the interview that Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, did, where he talked about the Bonanno and the Genovese crime families. And I'm like, damn. I'm like, somebody's got to explain this to me. Chauncey Billups played in the NBA for like 20 years. And so I got to believe Chauncey Billups has made a lot of money. Chauncey Billups has been a head coach in the NBA, I think, for like the last 5 years. And head coaches make a lot of money. What the hell are you doing getting involved with the mafia? Let me say this. I love the mafia. One of my favorite pastimes is to nibble on a gummy and then watch documentaries or movies or whatever about the mafia. I love The Godfather. I love The Sopranos. And I love reading and hearing about stories about the mafia. I love the mafia. The last thing I ever want to do, ever, is be involved with the mafia. Ever. Even the good mob bosses, like Vito Corleone. You never invite me to your home for coffee. You never put in x-ray machines into the poker table. What did I do for such disrespect? So someone's got to explain that one to me about how the Chauncey Billups, someone's got to explain that to me. Okay, it's time now for the Thursday night sermon. We kick off the NFL week, as we always do, with the Thursday night sermon. Number one, tonight we'll have the honor of watching Carson Wentz play quarterback on national TV for what feels like the third or fourth time this season. Minnesota at 3-3 has already matched their loss total from last year. Meanwhile, the quarterback they had last year, Sam Darnold, is 5-2 in Seattle and might be getting MVP looks for a second straight season. And what happened to Minnesota is really a reminder of two separate lessons that the late, great Floyd Reese taught me over the years. The first Floyd taught me is you never make a decision until you have to. And the second was that the job of the general manager is to protect the team from the coach. In both instances, Minnesota, with a young general manager and a young coach, are learning these the hard way. Yes, they drafted J.J. McCarthy in the first round, but just because you drafted J.J. in the first round doesn't mean that you have to play them or not sign the other guy when you won 14 games with him and he was just 27 years old. They let the decision they made in April of 2024 affect their decision for who their quarterback was going to be in 2025. Again, don't make a decision until you have to. And secondly, I think Kevin O'Connell bought the hype that he was the reason that Sam Darnold won 14 games and that Sam Darnold was the reason that Kevin O'Connell, lost in the playoffs. And why wouldn't he think that? Everybody else seemed to believe it too. But that doesn't mean that it's the truth. To do so would discredit the fact that Kevin O'Connell won 7 games in 2023 without Sam Darnold as his starting quarterback, and that he lost in the playoffs in the first round the same way he did with Sam Darnold with Kirk Cousins. Kevin O'Connell had a 27-year-old in his prime quarterback who won 14 games and talked himself out of it. And where was the general manager to say, dude, we just won 14 games with Sam? The GM's job is to protect the team from the coach. Can I get an amen? Number two, it's amazing what happens when we start playing the games. After spending an entire offseason assuming the AFC was going to be loaded at the top with Kansas City, Baltimore, and Buffalo, battling it out for a trip to the Super Bowl, we are approaching the halfway mark with Indianapolis as the number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs. Jacksonville, if the playoffs were to start today, would be the 7th seed, and Kansas City is on the outside looking in. Now, much will change before we get to January. And with all due respect to the great Mike Vrabel, I don't expect the New England Patriots to be the number 2 seed. But an AFC that felt, because of the quarterbacks in it, felt like an absolute gauntlet in order to navigate between Mahomes and Lamar and Burrow and Allen, now seems fairly wide open, with hope for guys like Daniel Jones. And that's what makes football fun. Can I get an amen? Number 3, Chris Canty, former Baltimore Raven, hosts an ESPN radio morning show that nobody across the country listens to. Canty played for the Ravens at one point and insinuated on that ESPN show that nobody listens to that he believes it's time for the Ravens to move on from John Harbaugh. Of course, nobody in reality actually takes that seriously, because the idea of Baltimore firing John Harbaugh for one bad season is absolutely ludicrous, and that is something that maybe the Titans would do, but the Ravens absolutely would not. Again, the Ravens are owned by Steve Bisciotti. They're well run. But if John Harbaugh were to leave the Ravens, because there does come a point in time where eventually it's time to move on, I think it's very likely that every team in the NFL that isn't solid at head coach would be interested in hiring John Harbaugh. I know the Ravens haven't been to the Super Bowl in a while, and I know Lamar Jackson has lost a bunch of playoff games, but I feel fairly certain when I say John Harbaugh can still coach. Can I get an amen? And finally, Sunday Night Football, the Steelers will be playing the Green Bay Packers, two of the most historic franchises in NFL history as Aaron Rodgers plays his old team for the first time in what is classic NFL television. Aaron versus the Packers. It's too bad the game isn't at Lambeau. And have you seen the uniforms the Steelers are going to be wearing on Sunday night? Oh my God. Heinous. And I understand that Nike wants to sell more shit and the leagues are getting into this whole more uniforms, more fun kind of idea. And I'm not against it because some of these uniforms look pretty badass. But that one, I mean, you got to be kidding me. Who wants to see Aaron Rodgers return versus the Green Bay Packers dressed like a human Lego? The Steelers are one of the teams in America that they have iconic uniforms, and so do the Packers. So I have to ask, why are we uglying up the beautiful game? And this isn't just football. Major League Baseball has ruined Saturdays with their heinous City Connect uniforms, in which the Boston Red Sox look like the Ukrainian national baseball team with light blue and yellow colors for the Red Sox. So I think I should be in charge of vetoing all uniform ideas across sports. And my one rule would be class over cash. I'll never forget when the Nashville Cats played in the Arena League and they had the little Amoco patch on their jersey, the gas station. And I thought, man, that is so poor. They have to have a logo on their uniform, sell ads in order to pay the bills. And now we're doing it in every sport except for the NBA. Except for the NFL. Class over cash. Can I get an amen? That's our Thursday night sermon. Enjoy Thursday night football. I'll take the Chargers tonight. I believe they are favored to win. That's it for us. Like and subscribe and tell your friends. And wherever you get your podcast, knock it out of the park. Stillman and Company. We will see everybody tomorrow live 2:00 for a Fireball Hot Take Friday. Stillman and Company right here, 440 Sports.